Welcome to our Sunday service today, September 20th, which we are bringing to you from the beautiful East End Park in Woodstock, Vermont. Many members of our congregation, as well as members of the community, have worked hard to create this space to gather and to hike. I'm Ann Marinello, and so glad for each of you to join us this Sunday, whether you are local or from further away. If there are gifts from this pandemic, one has been sharing our service with friends who have moved away or are not able to attend in person, and with new friends who have tuned in from far and near. The North Chapel has been closed for in-person gatherings since mid-March. However, we continue to actively connect. Our Sunday services are pre-filmed and posted on social media. We also connect via Zoom for committee meetings and a virtual coffee hour. Diane, our music director, continues to provide beautiful music, but also splices and edits our videos to create the services. Our in-person meetings have been limited to social justice vigils and to 2 backyard Vesper services, both with Mass and social distancing. We remain very active despite not gathering on Sundays in person. Our beloved minister, Leon Dunkley, will be away for 2 weeks for a much-needed vacation. We are so grateful that today Laura Foley, a poet and a member of our congregation, is willing to share some of her poetry. Laura has reached out to 2 other poet friends who have agreed to share their work as well, James Cruz and Barbara Crooker. James Cruz is from Shaftesbury, Vermont, where he lives with his husband on an organic farm. He is the author of 4 collections of poetry and is editor of the popular Healing the Divide, Poems of Kindness and Connection. Barbara Crooker is the author of 9 books of poetry. Her work has appeared in a wide variety of journals, including the anthologies Looking for God in All the Right Places and Summer. 2 other works of hers are a spiritual biography of the season and Spring. Her most recent book of poetry is Some Glad Morning. Laura Foley lives in the Vermont Hills with her wife and is the author of Why I Never Finished My Dissertation, which was one of Kirkus Review's top poetry books of 2019. She also has a new collection coming out entitled It's This, from Salmon Press. She has won many awards and has been read on Garrison Keillor's Writer's Almanac. Thank you for joining us for this virtual gathering. It's good to be together, as Leon would say. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Laura Foley, and today I'm here to talk a bit about poetry as healing, poetry and healing. And I'm speaking to you from the top of a hill in Pomfret, Vermont, which in itself has a healing quality, just being out on this beautiful day in September. Here's a poem from Summertime. It's called Summer Day. Here floats the mind on summer's dock, on a sluggishness that waves any anxiety away. Long lines of verse river the page in mimicry of sun's most generous days, and crows caw lazily from thick-leafed limbs, like rum-dazed sailors floating on a tranquil sea. Hazy clouds wisp and don't quite form to shapes, thinning to mist, baked to nothing, the sun claiming lordship over creation. Only minnows, in the cooler darkness of a shaded pool, dart, circle restlessly in an eddying stream, made low by heat and lack of rain. The dash of water on a rock is but a whisper, lulling listeners to sleep, to dream of being. So this last year, my wife had breast cancer and went through treatments. And in the beginning of it, we thought it reminded us of a kind of a journey that we had to go on, and a kind of pilgrimage. And a couple of years ago, the two of us did the Camino in Spain. We walked 500 miles across Spain. So we likened this experience of cancer to a kind of trudge, a kind of destiny to get to healing. I wrote a poem about that called To Santiago. We began climbing in the year's darkest days, diagnosis in late November, turning trips to the cancer center's mountain into adventure. Tying a scallop shell to her hospital backpack, we metaphored illness as a pilgrimage to Santiago. 8 chemo treatments, followed by surgery. We trekked December's steep, bitter peaks, January's icy valleys. How many miles, we'd say, about halfway, sometime in snowy February. We slogged on through a wet March, a windy April that didn't seem like spring. Though our feet didn't develop blisters, her heart raced at an alarming rate. She lost her hair, and her taste buds changed. A bit metallic, she'd say, with grit. As we approached surgery in early May, we searched the horizon for the cathedral. Knew the steeple would soon come into view. Soon we'd descend the final hill to Santiago. Soon the marine-robed priests would swing the Botafumeiro over our heads, fill the vast space with cleansing fragrance of myrrh and frankincense. Soon we'd stroll along the beach at the end of the world, the beach that begins one world and begins another, and cancer would become a wintry memory. So I also had some medical issues this year, and everything has been resolved, but these poems came out of that experience. All of it. Remember the fluctuating sea like living memory. Remember morning on the beach, the sun's orange disk like a porthole into divine fire. Remember the seals, one then another, bobbing up as if to say hello. Remember the swim, the sharp rock, the gash on your leg. Remember the bee sting reddening your ear, the itch and swelling with something to tell the wandering mind. Remember the hard walk, the cobblestones, the paths, and the steps. Remember the church services, the vespers, the nuns blessing your knee. Remember the time not long ago a day closed you into an ambulance, your heart beating too fast to bear. Remember being lifted up in the air, waving goodbye, calling out, "Tell the children, please." Remember the peace in returning to dogs, to house, to Clara lit within. Remember swimming in the pond again, in a body made new by gratitude. Another poem from that episode of Heart Issues. Bumpy country. As the medics lift my stretcher into the air and wriggle it into the ambulance as if it might not fit, I mouth, "I hope they don't drop me," to Clara, who stands on the ground below. And I find myself wondering, as I'm sped to the hospital, as my heart does its too quick samba rhythm, as if to dance me to the edge of time, as the IV bag bangs back and forth, as we travel bumpy country, if those words to Clara were my last. And if so, maybe it's best to end with a laugh. And I'd like to end with a poem about one of my granddaughters. And I do find that reflecting on gratitude or reflecting on a child's view of the world is a healing experience. And poetry in general is a kind of removal from the busyness of life, a kind of pause. And anytime we pause and breathe and take stock of where we are, I find that in itself creates space for healing. So may that be true for all of us. This is called Symbiosis. My granddaughter and I climb the hill in crisp sunrise. I lift an oak leaf from the ground crusted with first frost. She touches like fairy dust and pockets to show her dad. We rest at a picnic spot on wooden chairs, close our eyes in meditation. Listen, I say, to the sounds you hear with closed eyes, fallen leaves crinkling in autumn's morning breeze, blackbirds squawking unseen somewhere in the high pines, wind shuffling through hemlocks. And, she asserts in her thin, high toddler voice, clear and glad as a cardinal's trilling, the chairs. Listen to the chairs. And we do, side by side, with eyes closed, instructing each other. Thank you so much for listening.
Hi, my name is James Cruz, and I've used poetry for a long time as a tool for healing, because whenever I sit down to write a poem, I find that I'm often describing, what's going on within me, but especially around me. And so poetry for me is a way of bringing myself back into the moment and really back into my body, getting me back in touch with what's going on with me physically and through all the sensory doorways. So the first poem I'd like to share with you all is called Self-Care. And I notice now that the talk of self-care is in the air quite often. And I'm so glad, because it just seems such an important topic for those of us, especially who might be prone to be a little tougher and more aggressive with ourselves. So this is called Self-Care. Some days it feels like a foreign language I'm asked to practice, with new words for happiness, work, and love. I'm still learning how to say a cup of tea for no reason, what to call the extra honey I drizzle in, how to label the relentless urge to do more and more as useless, and how to translate the heart's pounding message when it comes: enough, enough. This morning I search for words to capture the glimmering sun as it lifts above the mountains, clouds already closing in as fat droplets of rain darken the deck. I'm learning to call this stillness self-care too, just standing here as goldfinches scatter up from around the feeder, like broken pieces of bright yellow stained glass, reassembling in the sheltering arms of a maple. And so the next poem actually comes from a similar moment of stillness. I've always been fascinated with reading the Psalms, and there's a word that appears over and over, Selah, which is actually the name of one of my best friend's kids. And so this word has always fascinated me, and as far as we can tell, when the Psalms were being read or sung, the word Selah is a signal for the reader or singer to just pause and really take in what was just spoken or sung. And so this is another moment, a kind of meditation on that word. This is called Selah. After black clouds swirled in the sky and rain made a lake of the driveway, the early evening turned so quiet I could hear suds dissolving in the sink, the bubbles popping, draining away. And I dropped so easily into myself, like a rock sinking through clear water. The scribe writing the story of my life must have decided to insert the word Selah, that appears over and over in the Psalms, and which we can only guess is an invitation to the reader. Pause here in the text and leave room between this breath and the next for the sound of that still, small voice rising up in you. And this next poem actually is called Self-Compassion, so in a similar vein. And this is another phrase that's in our consciousness quite often right now. And I had this moment during a really tough week this summer when we discovered a pipe had burst in the cellar. My husband had a tick-borne illness that he luckily has recovered from. It just seemed like everything was happening at once. And so I recalled a moment when I was too cynical actually to receive any sort of self-care or self-compassion. My friend and I snickered the first time we heard the meditation teacher, a grown man, call himself honey, with a hand placed over his heart to illustrate how we too might become more gentle with ourselves and our runaway minds. It's been years since we sat with legs twisted on cushions, holding back our laughter, and today I found myself crouched on the floor again, not meditating exactly, just agreeing to be still, saying honey to myself each time I thought about my husband splayed on the couch with aching joints and fever from a tick bite. What if he never gets better? Or considered the mess of the next election, or remembered in just a few more minutes I'd have to climb down into the cellar and empty the bucket I left beneath a leaky pipe that can't be fixed until next week. How long do any of us really have before the body begins to break down and empty its mysteries into the air? Oh, honey, I said, for once without a trace of irony or blush of shame, the touch of my own hand on my chest, like that of a stranger, oddly comforting, in spite of the facts. And so this is the last poem that I'll share with you all. And this one is called Stubborn Praise. And actually, a friend of mine and I both wrote poems with a similar title right around the time that the pandemic was beginning to happen, when, obviously there was so much to distress over. And yet, I think during this time, I'm still called to the everyday joys and beauties that are around us. And so I think there's this way in which I want to stubbornly praise and hold on to those small joys alongside the sorrow, the injustice, and everything else that we're asked to hold at this moment in time in the history of the world. So this is stubborn praise. Bless the unkind, the mean, the petty, for they remind us how not to move through our lives. True, we can allow the anger of others to turn us bitter, fool us into thinking the whole world is made of nettles ready to sting us wherever we touch. But let's instead go around stubbornly praising those whose hearts stay closed, though we can't yet see the line of light shining beneath the locked door, though we can't quite trust that kindness stirs in each of us like the child we once were, wanting only to run through a field with friends at dusk, holding hands and chasing the sun.
I'm Barbara Crooker, and I'm going to read 2 poems. This is from my first book, Radiance, and the title of the poem is Sometimes I Am Startled Out of Myself. Like this morning, when the wild geese came squawking, flapping their rusty hinges, and something about their trek across the sky made me think about my life. The places of brokenness, the places of sorrow, the places where grief has strung me out to dry. And then the geese come calling, the leader falling back when tired, another taking her place. Hope is born on wings. Look at the trees. They turn to gold for a brief while, then lose it all each November. Through the cold months, they stand, take the worst weather has to offer, and still they put out shy green leaves come April, come May. The geese glide over the cornfields, land on the pond with its sedges and reeds. You do not have to be wise. Even a goose knows how to find shelter where the corn still lies in the stubble and dried stalks. All we do is pass through here, the best way we can. They stitch up the sky, and it is whole again. That was the first poem I thought of when I thought about recording some poems on healing. This next one is a new poem, and because we're in September, I thought it appropriate, and also because when I'm looking for healing, I turn to what's outside, what's around me, and just try to pay attention. Late September. Look how the light is beginning to dim, tarnished like old silver rubbed thin, a note from a lover read over and over, folded too many times. The flowers are trying to outdo themselves, goldenrod, purple asters, the dusty mauve of autumn sedum, colors from the parlors of half-remembered aunts. There's so much to love in this undoing, the sky losing its nickel of light every night, clouds turning pumpkin, wild grape, pewter. There's a need for something aged and smoky, lapsang souchong, single malt scotch. Even as it frays and unravels, the leaves letting go, the birds leaving, this late radiance plays us like a cello, a last quartet, a kiss at the station, all of us waving goodbye, goodbye.
I've seen the broken shards of glass become a piece of art. I watched the clouds of day transform to rain in sunset sky. bright, celestial light, with twinkling stars adorn. The shadows give perspective on things already known, and the light, although familiar, was only mine alone. Only mine alone. Only mine alone. Only mine alone. I have loved the stars too fondly to be fearful of the night. The night.
Thanks again for joining us for our Sunday service today. My name is Mary Blanton, and I would like to remind you of a few things that are happening at the North Chapel. First, if you haven't returned the task force survey, please do, as it will help us to see how people are feeling about the possibility of gathering once again in the church. And consider buying a copy of Wednesday Poets. 3 of the poets are members of our congregation. Leon has written a beautiful introduction, and the proceeds from the sale all go to the North Chapel. And consider signing up for a covenant group. Following these announcements, there will be a video of Laura Foley describing her experience in a covenant group. For information about signing up for a covenant group and much more, please go to our North Chapel website. Thanks, and I hope to see you at coffee hour.
Hello, my name is Laura Foley, and I'm here to speak to you today about Covenant Group. Just a few words about what it has meant to me and why I liked it so much. We did it starting in the winter and went through the spring, which means that we entered into COVID and became a Zoom group. In the beginning, we met in person. It worked just as well on Zoom. It was a wonderful, really wonderful way to connect with people from the community, to get to know people from the community on a deeper level. And this meant having readings, poetry, excerpts from Martin Luther King. We read a lot of different really great poets, David White, for example, Rilke and Rumi. And we talked about what it meant for us to take in some of the ideas, such as how do we connect with one another? What is empathy versus sympathy? We spoke about endings and difficulties. So I just recommend it to any of you who are interested in getting to know people at a deeper level and even getting to know yourself at a deeper level. So I hope that you consider joining a covenant group, and I hope that you enjoy it as much as I did. Thank you.